So it's been good to see a lot of young faces here. People who still at school, not even hopefully thinking of marriage just yet, and definitely not thinking of parenting, hopefully, just yet. But you can never be, as Scott and John already shared, you can't be too prepared to start thinking about these things. And so here are a couple of things to help you young people prepare for parenthood. Some practical advice and some practical things that you can do in preparation for parenthood. Okay, so to prepare for maternity, this is to the women, you put on a dressing gown, stick a bean bag down your front, leave it there for 9 months, and then after 9 months, take out 10% of the beans. You guys worked that one out? Yeah, I thought it was funny, maybe. Men, to prepare for paternity, go to the local chemist, tip the contents of your wallet on the counter, and tell the pharmacist to help himself. Then go to the supermarket, arrange to have your salary paid directly to their head office. Go home, pick up the newspaper, and read it for the last time. Guys, in addition, sell your bike, PlayStation, surfboard, sound system, and any other boys' toys that you may own. Use the money to buy a pack of 32 disposable nappies. With the leftover money, buy a camp cot, a pram, car seat, an oversized tog bag for the nappies, and a black plastic bike. Try and fit all these items into the boot of a Suzuki Swift. If you're unable to do so in 3 minutes flat, take up playing Tetris in your spare time and try again in a couple of weeks. I think Chantal can help you with that, she's pretty good at Tetris. To discover how the night will feel, walk around the living room from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. carrying a wet bag weighing approximately 4 to 6 kgs. At 10 p.m. put the bag down, set the alarm for midnight and go to sleep. Get up at 12, walk around the living room again with the bag till 1 a.m. Put the alarm on for 3 a.m. If you can't get back to sleep, get up at 2 and make a drink. Go to bed at 2:45, get up again at 3 when the alarm goes off. Sing songs in the dark until 4 a.m. Put the alarm on for 5 a.m., get up, make breakfast, keep us up for 5 years, and look cheerful. Hollow out a melon, make a small hole in the side, suspend it from the ceiling and swing it from side to side. Now get a bowl of soggy Weet-Bix and attempt to spoon it in the swaying melon by pretending to be an aeroplane. Continue until half the Weet-Bix is gone, tip the rest into your lap, making sure that most of it falls on the floor. Buy an octopus and a string bag. Attempt to put the octopus in the string bag so that none of the arms hang out. Time allowed for this is the entire morning. Hide a fish finger behind the stereo, leave it there all summer. Stick your fingers on the flower bed, then rub them on the clean walls, and cover the stains with crayons. Go to your local supermarket, take with you the nearest thing you can find which resembles a preschool child. A fully grown goat is an excellent example. If you intend to have more than one child, take more than one goat. Buy your week's groceries without letting the goat out of your sight. Pay for everything the goat eats or destroys. Until you can easily accomplish this, do not even contemplate having children. Take an egg carton, using a pair of scissors and a pot of paint, turn it into an alligator. Now take a toilet tube, using only scotch tape and a piece of foil, turn it into a Christmas cracker. Last, take a milk container, a ping pong ball, and an empty packet of Cocoa Pops and make an exact replica of the Eiffel Tower. Congratulations, you have now qualified to help with school projects. Always repeat everything you say at least 5 times, and then learn the names of every character from Postman Pat, Fireman Sam, and Thomas the Tank Engine. When you find yourself singing Postman Pat at work, you finally qualify as a parent. Okay, so a lot of that is obviously tongue-in-cheek, but many of those have reality as its source, and that's why there were a few chuckles now and then. But this is such a large topic to actually give justice, and as John explained in the beginning, it's quite ambitious for us to tackle the whole thing, family, marriage, and parenting, all in one afternoon, but we'll try our best. A lot of what I'm going to share with you today, and a lot of what we've kind of been through as a church, is content from a guy who has got a lot of material on this, and probably the best material I've managed to find out there. It's a guy by the name of Chip Ingram, and he's put together a parenting called Effective Parenting in a Defective World. As a church, we've done it, I think, 2 or 3 times. He's got another series called Household Home, which is kind of more inclusive, not just of parents, but of marriage as well. So you can imagine you'd rather have a home as opposed to just a house. And so a lot of the material that I'm going to cover, just the framework, is from his content. Now it's hard to do it justice because his latest, he's kind of brought out new releases, if I can call it that, over time. His latest one is 4 series. I think we did one which was 8. They're an hour long, the videos, and there's quite a short abbreviated workbook that goes along with that. And I will endeavour to, when this gets posted out there, for people to rewatch, for those who weren't able to make it. I'll give you access to that, and then also just a link to those 4 videos. I've watched them, kind of fast-tracked my way through that before today's session, and it was amazing how much stuff I'd forgotten, and just this little trick is to remind us of parenting. Kath and I always said we should always rewatch these videos every couple of years, because you kind of hone in on where you at as a stage as a parent. You know, whether you've got a newborn, or a preteen, or a teen, or even those who are already into adulthood. And there's so many things in there. So I'll strongly recommend, if you have got time, or make time, as a couple, to actually watch those videos together and work through it together. Because he fleshes out a lot of the content which I'll only be able to put a few bullet points to. God gives us, in creation, He basically gave us the entire world to be a steward of it. And so stewardship is quite a broad topic. Okay, we need to be good stewards of our finances. We need to be good stewards of the physical possessions that we have. We need to maintain our car. We need to be good stewards of the things that we are given. One of the biggest challenges, though, and most rewarding challenges, is the stewardship of raising children. And it'll probably be the greatest stewardship that you'll ever be given to tackle in life. Our children will be our greatest challenge. They'll be our greatest joy. They'll be our greatest pain. But ultimately, hopefully, they will be our greatest reward. And this is a promise that God gives us. He says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. It's such a well-known scripture. It's been shared many, many times, obviously in the context of parenting. But there's so much to that. And in conjunction with that, if I tie it in with Psalm 127 verse 3, children are a gift from the Lord, and they are a reward from Him. And ultimately, that's what we want to establish here. We want to be able to say, when we finished our parenting, and we never quite finished parenting, actually, you speak to anybody, it's very loud up there, isn't it? If you speak to anybody who's a parent, a grandparent, a great-grandparent, you always are a parent. You never abdicate that responsibility. It changes over time, but you will always be a parent once you take that tiny little baby home from hospital with you, which is a very daunting task, I must say. I've been there 3 times, and each time it's such a precious but a seriously daunting task, all wrapped up in one. There are a few timeless principles that we can look at and visit that create an environment which can help us achieve this promise that God gave us, that our children will be a great reward. There are no guarantees, though, but there's a very strong correlation to the biblical principles we're going to be sharing this evening, to this very fact that there will be a great reward. Obviously, there are differences. I know of people who've been brought up in a very godly home, they've been taught godly principles, they've been involved in the church, and they've left. And then you see guys who've been brought up in a completely broken home, and God touches their lives, and they are the most amazing people, and in turn are the most amazing parents themselves. So it's not a guarantee, but there's a very, very strong correlation. And often when we do things like parenting courses, that's why it's sad to see that not many people here. Because people just assume, well, when I grew up as a kid, it was fine. My parents never went to parenting courses. I think I turned out okay. I attend church and my kids are doing fine. Or hopefully, when I do have kids, they'll be fine. Why do I need to attend such a course? In the old days, there used to be a saying that it takes a village to raise a child. Unfortunately now, if you had to leave a child in the village, they will not be raised with godly principles. In the old days, potentially they would be. And you could have a wayward parent, but if the child was brought up in the community, they could potentially be led on a path which had most of these godly principles. Nowadays, though, they are pulled radically away from us. So the world that our children are living in are completely different time frame. And so we need to be on our A game as parents if we want to raise godly children. In light of this, effective parenting actually begins with very clear-cut objectives. You know the old saying, if you don't have a target that you're aiming for, you'll hit it every time. And so what is your target for parenting? I just want you to pause for a second now and think. What is your target? If you had to summarize it in one word, what is your target for you as parents to parent your child or children?
Bring them to Jesus, to
Bring
gospel.
to Jesus, to gospel. Okay, that's kind of the right answer, but often what do you hear people say, even Christian parents? They make a decision for their child and they say, the only thing I want my child to be happy and content. Okay? So often we parent unbeknown that we actually want our child to be happy. So for a lot of people, their target is happiness. And so our whole goal is to keep our kid happy and to make sure that they don't have too much to deal with and that they are content most of the time. If we do that though, our parenting often becomes out of fear instead of out of focus, because you're so worried that they are happy. And you end up breeding kids or raising kids who are completely self-centered, because everything revolves about them. If they're happy, they're fine. If they start crying, well then we have to deal with it and stop them from crying. And so the entire culture is to keep your kid happy, whatever that may take. Material possessions, often it costs a whole lot of money, and you find yourself running around after this child to keep them happy and content, and it never lasts anyway. So ultimately, what should it be? Craig kind of alluded to us, but to summarize it in one word, the Bible says this for us as well. We need to be holy. Holiness should be our target. If you think about it, our whole life is to become more and more like Jesus, to become more and more holy. So Jesus is our prime example, and we need to become more and more like him. It's a whole sanctification process. And as parents, our journey, our job is to make sure that our child starts on this journey of sanctification, because ultimately we need to take, and this is one of the key objectives from today, is that our ultimate goal is to take our child's dependence from us and move it to a dependence on God. And so it should be a smoothness transition from a dependence on us as parents to a dependence on God. And so this holiness thing starts from the very beginning. The world will tell you that you need to keep your child happy and content because ultimately they need to become independent. They need to be able to do things on their own. It still revolves completely around self. Okay? Because now they need to be able to do things on their own, but it all revolves around happiness and self. Whereas the Bible quite clearly teaches that our whole focus should be first to Christ, then to others, and then to ourselves. And so the whole focus becomes completely different, and we don't find this target right up front. We're in for a big hiding. Because we're going to flip-flop between the two, and our children are going to get confused in the whole thing. And I don't know if we've done this a few times, even in kids ministry. The irony is that if you try and keep your child happy, they end up becoming most miserable.
Yeah.
However, if you keep the focus on Jesus, others, and then themselves, and you can change that to yourself, then you are filled with joy. And actually, there's an acronym for it: Jesus, others, you. And so, the flip side of happiness, the godly side of happiness, is joy. Because we don't need to be happy to have joy. We can be in a dismal situation or circumstance that we're really struggling with. We're definitely not happy, but we can have the joy of the Lord because the joy of the Lord is our strength. And so our targets need to be established up front. And you need to, as parents, be on the same page even before you consider having children. That's why it's so awesome to see young guys here, because we need to establish this right up front. There's only one instruction in the Bible to children, and this is this. It says, "Children, it is your Christian duty to obey your parents, for this is the right thing to do. Respect your father and mother is the first commandment that has a promise added, so that all may go well with you, and you may live a long time in the land." Ephesians 6, verses 1 to 3. So there's only one instruction in the Bible to children, and that is to obey their parents. On the flip side of that, from the parents' perspective, there are quite a few instructions, but this is one of the key ones. It says, "Fathers," note, fathers, the head of the home, not mothers, "don't exasperate your children or make it difficult for them to obey the commandment. Bring them up with Christian teaching in Christian discipline." Fathers, do not exasperate your children. There's another version, the Literal Standard Version says this: "Fathers, do not provoke your children, but nourish them." I love that word, nourish. John even mentioned it earlier about nourishing. Nourish them in instruction and admonition of the Lord. And so effectively, your child has two primary needs. They're going to determine, are they significant? Their significance and security. So significance and security. And it basically stems out of that very scripture. They're going to ask the question, do you love me? And where are the boundaries? Two key scriptures. Do you love me? Am I significant to you? And am I secure in this environment of the family? And if I'm secure, then surely there must be boundaries. And they did a experiment, a case study, where they monitored parents' involvement with their children. And they looked at these two key components. So discipline, where are the boundaries? And do you love me? So then the love axis. So obviously discipline runs across from zero discipline to 100% authoritarian control on the right hand side, and love runs from zero at the bottom to 100% at the top. And so if we start in quadrant number 1, which basically has zero discipline and 100% love, or somewhere in that vicinity, those are the permissive parents. Okay, so you love your child, but anything goes. There are no clear-cut boundaries. And they found that children in that environment had a very low self-image, and they felt inferior. Incredible, because you think you're trying to cultivate the exact opposite, but that was the outcome. Go down to quadrant number 2 in the bottom left. So this is zero discipline and zero love. And that was the neglectful parent. These are the parents who've got so many big issues to deal with. They might be going through a divorce. They might be a single parent who can't put food on the table. And so they're completely focused on anything and everything but their children. A very desperate place to be in. And those children had little or no relationship. And they were estranged. They wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. They didn't want any association with their parents, because clearly their parents had no time for them at all. We move across to the third quadrant. This is the disciplinarian. Okay? The authoritarian parents, where you will do this, you will do that. If you don't do this, there are consequences. But it's all done to make sure they just toe the line, to make your job as a parent easier. And they found that the child in that situation is provoked to rebellion. So because there's such harsh consequences, they will toe the line. But they're purely doing it out of fear. And as soon as they can get out of that family environment, they're gone. The fourth quadrant, which you're all hoping we kind of sit in some way, is obviously not necessarily 100%, but close to 100% love and 100% discipline. Well, we suppose we could call it 100%. We don't quite get it right. But we'd like to think we are sitting there. Now, just stop and pause and ask yourself the question, if I had to tend towards one of those, so tend towards permissive or tend towards authoritarian, okay, along the discipline line. Hopefully we love our children, so hopefully you can get that one right, okay? So hopefully we're in the top half, but if we had to tend towards authoritarian or permissive, which quadrant would it be in? And it's a good question to ask ourselves, because that's potentially where you need to spend some time. First chatting to your spouse, and then meting it out in practical ways. And we'll look at a few of those as we go. So basically, this secular empirical evidence says God's way is the best way. Because God says we need to have boundaries for our children and we need to love them with all our hearts. So this, I've got two A's there. Should just be one. The full word hupa akua is made up of two words. That is the word that the only instruction that's given to children, which is obedience. Okay? Now obedience, hupa akua, hupa means under, and akua, we have acoustic guitars, it means under the sound of your voice. And so basically, obedience is teaching your child to come under the hearing of your voice. You can't discipline your child unless you are communicating with them. You have to communicate. Communication is coming under the sound of your voice. And this is such an important point because ultimately we're trying to take our dependence from us onto the dependence of God. If your children can't come under the sound and the obedience of your voice, of somebody they can see, how on earth are we going to expect them to come under the hearing and the obedience of God's voice of someone they cannot see? And so this is critical that we get this right, because we're basically training our children to come under the hearing of God's voice and His obedience. So how do we do that? In Deuteronomy, it has a lovely little portion of scripture which kind of gives us an insight on how we're supposed to go about doing this. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and all your might." Jesus echoed that scripture in the New Testament. "These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on your doorposts of your house, and on your gate." So when do we discipline, and when do we apply obedience? Always. All the time. It's not a set portion of the day. It's not like you have a 5-minute session in the morning and then hopefully that will carry through to the rest of the day or to the rest of the week. It's continual. It's all the time. And it requires communication. And so basically, we need to be talking and communicating with our children all the time. But ultimately, what we do also need to do is we need to practice what we preach. We can't go and tell them one thing and do another. And it brings us to this whole principle of modeling, that more is caught than taught. And so we can talk till we're blue in the face. God says we need to talk to our children, but if we're telling them one thing and we're doing something completely different, then they're not going to get it. We can't tell a child to respect their sibling and to not talk to them disrespectfully, and then we do the same to our wives. They're going to model how we talk to our wives, not what we tell them with respect to how to communicate with their siblings, or anybody for that matter. And so, Paul even says in the New Testament, he says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Christ is our ultimate example, but for our children, physically they see us. So we need to be the example of Christ to our children. It's a huge responsibility, but that's what we are called to do. And to be able to transfer what we believe and what we want our children to believe to our children, we need to build a relationship which enables this transfer. Chip Ingram calls it this: we need to build relationships that bond. And there are a couple of points. So there's so many points here, and hopefully we can speak to a few of them. I'm going to run through them all one after the other, and then I'll mention a couple of points which kind of spans a few of them all in one go. So the first thing is that we need to have unconditional love for our child. And that goes without saying. We need to have scheduled time, focused attention, eye contact, ongoing communication, meaningful touch, have fun together, and pray together. Now those might all seem fairly obvious, the things that we need to do, but they did a study in America with fathers and children. They wired it up with mics, and they basically monitored the meaningful time that they actually had with their children per week. And so it basically was all of these things: time, focused attention, eye contact, physically there in the moment, mentally there in the moment. How long do you think, on average, a father spent with meaningful conversation with their kids?
What, in a day?
In a week.
In a week?
37 seconds.
Whoa, what?
37 seconds of meaningful contact with their children. It was pretty much coming home from work and maybe just looking them in the eye and saying, what do you do for school? But most of the time when fathers were communicating with their children, they were absent. So they asked them how their day was, but meanwhile they're actually busy focused on the next meeting, what they need to do that night. It might have been a social engagement. And so they came up with the conclusion that it was 37 seconds, which is just unbelievable. And so how do we tackle this? How have we as society got into a position where we would say we're doing all these things that we are doing for our children? That we're going to work, we're putting bread on the table, we're making money, we're trying to send them to good schools, get them a good education, and we are only spending 37 seconds with meaningful conversation with them. How have we got to this point? Well, we've let all these things of the world filter into and distract us from our day. And I think often we say, well, I'm so busy and I need to work. Yes, we do need to work. John said we need to work. In fact, there's a little section that he does we don't have time for now, but work is actually a vocation. It's a calling. It's not a chore. Okay? We shouldn't think it's a chore to get through the week and then fall in a heap on the weekend and then grudgingly get up again on Monday. Work is actually a vocation, which means a calling. And so God calls us to work in whatever field we are doing. And we need to enjoy the work that we do. But ultimately, we do work so that we can provide. But there are a lot of other things that we are potentially doing, and you can help me out here, which are basically whittling in time that we can actually spend with our children. One of the key things that we've been sold a lie is that we need to spend quality time with our children, not quantity time. And so if you have a focused time, maybe 5 minutes, well, it's probably better than 37 seconds, but 5 minutes of quality time, then that's fine. But the thing is, quality time is often spontaneous. You can't create quality time. You can't rush in and say, okay, we need to have this heart-to-heart, you know, my boy. Okay, so let me know, like, what do you think of the birds and the bees, you know? You can't have this conversation as you're rushing in from work, they're going up to sports. Quality time actually comes in quantity time. So while you're spending time with children, while you're going for this long walk, and all of a sudden you see something, you hear something, and a spontaneous conversation starts, and it's a quality moment. But it happens in quantity time. And so we need to make as much time as possible with our kids. And it doesn't have to be completely focused, all about them. Just be together, spend time together. And so one of the first things we can do is we can switch off electronic devices. We can switch off our TV. It's so easy to come down and flop down in front of the TV. I actually heard a guy share once, and his TV was such a distraction for him and his family. He physically turned the TV around, so it faced the wall. So if they really wanted to watch the TV, he had to physically take the thing, turn it around, replug in all the wires. So there's occasions maybe you want to watch a program, there's nothing wrong with that. But it was an effort to do it. And so make it an effort to watch TV. Simple solution, but could potentially be a complete lifesaver for you and your family. Eat together. There's something so significant about having a meal together. You even look, Jesus' last moments on earth, what did he do? He had a meal with his disciples. I don't know what it is, but when you have a meal with someone, there's a connection there. It's different to just meeting, but when you sit around a table and you have a meal together, there's something incredibly special about it. And people start to open up. You start to share about your day. You start to forget about what you're supposed to be doing next. You're just in the moment, you're having a meal together, and that's where often your quality time comes from. Make time to spend around the table. It was even alluded to, Scott mentioned, the sitting on laps in front of the TV, wolfing down your meal. I actually stayed with a friend of mine last few days in Cape Town, and he's got grown kids just like mine. Not once did they sit down at the table together. Their kids are very busy, they're in and out, they're doing amazing things. But it was like, oh, Mom, where's supper? Grab it, put it in the microwave, heat it up, off we go. And next thing, we actually, the three adults sat together eating at the table, and once one of their children sat with us. The rest of the time, they were just out and about doing their own thing. And so, spending time, having a meal together is incredibly significant. When they are younger, read them bedtime stories. It's such a special moment, especially dads. Read them a story. Tell them a fun story. Make up a story about you and about them going on this adventure. And then hit pause, and then the next installment will be the next night. Those are the memories that they will enjoy. And it's out of those moments that you're going to get precious time with your children. So we need to make time. I don't know if anybody else has got some golden nugget which will help you make quantity time for your children so that you can have quality time to be able to do those things.
One thing I did when I used to fetch Alex from school, I always made sure that your radio was off in the car so that we had to talk to
Awesome. Yeah, so often if you had to travel to get to school, that can be forced time. You're both in this little metal box, you're sitting right next to each other, and you've got 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it is, to chat to each other. So often, what's the easy thing we do? We just put on the radio, or we hotspot our phone, and the playlist is discontinuous. And there might be some Christian songs, but we're not having any meaningful conversation.
Yeah, I echo Linda's thing. Girls nice to spend a lot of time
Like to get in the car.
talking.
Absolutely. You know what, it just reminds me, a friend of mine, his daughter, they've also got 3 kids and they're a few years older than us, and we always look at them and say, that's where I want to be in about 5 years' time. Anyway, his daughter went over to Germany as an exchange student. And when she came back, she was sharing how horrified she was on how the families operate over there. the kids and the parents live completely different lives. They live under the same roof, but they do their complete own thing because they can. They've got public transport, everything is safe, and so the parents are doing one thing at night, the kids are off doing their own thing. And occasionally they will meet each other in the passageway and tell each other where they go. But besides that, all they're doing is living under the same roof. There was no physical contact, there was no hugs, there was no communication. It was simply they just lived under the same roof. And she was saying that we actually privileged in South Africa to some extent because we have to travel with our kids. We live in an environment where we can't just let them go off on public transport and do their own thing. And we sometimes see that as a negative. But she saw it as a complete positive because they did so many things together as a family. If you wanted to go out and do something, you had to ask your parents, can you please take me? Because they couldn't go on their own. And so you went with your child, and while you went, you could chat, and you could see who they were meeting with, and you could see how they were engaging, and you were part of their lives. Whereas over in Europe, they're doing completely their own thing. The other thing that really moved her was that she said it's quite a physical family. They're always hugging each other and teasing each other, and there's this meaningful touch. And especially dads. Often when your daughters grow up, they start looking like their moms, and you sometimes think meaningful touch can be inappropriate. But they want to be hugged, and they want to be loved. I still dance around the kitchen with my daughters. It's lovely. And it's this physical touch, which is so, so important. Sometimes that non-verbal communication can be just as, if not more important than verbal communication. So all of those things will build relationships that bond, which enable us now to transfer what we believe to what they believe. And without that relationship, that will never happen. Okay, so those are some generic principles which can be applied across the board. Okay, whether they're young or whether they're old. Building relationships is continuous. From when you first bring that little bundle of joy home to when you're walking them down the aisle and beyond. Those principles are at play. But there are various changes as they go through different stages in life. Okay, and it's important that we identify with these because the way that we react and interact with our children is different on each stage, and we can often get it confused. I'll give you a few examples of that just now. But if you take a look, we've got ages between 0 and 4, then 0 to 4 and 5, and then 6 to 7, 11, 12, and 16 to 17. And the way they've broken it down, according to this chart by Lawrence Kohlberg, is that in the beginning, we just define rules. Okay? You do this because mom and dad say so. There's no arguments, there's no discussion. That is just what you do. Bedtime is 7 o'clock, you go to bed at 7. We don't enter into any discussion. Okay? You aren't allowed to have that sweet, that's final. You were given one before we came to the shops, that is off the charts. Okay? You aren't allowed to touch it. There are basic rules. As you move into when they're 6 and 7, you build relationships. So you start explaining to them the reasons and why, and that kind of builds into the next one. And so the reason why you go to bed at 7 or you go to bed at 8 is because if you don't, then in the morning you're not going to be able to be ready for school, and you start to explain why you have given them these various rules. And then when they get to 16 and 17, you basically now start engaging with them. And they are allowed to input and be a part and parcel of the rules and the boundaries that you set. And so if we look at it and we give them some other, our role. In the beginning, we commander-in-chief. We lay out the rules, and that is that. Okay? After that, we instruct them. Now, instructor gives them a bit more information of what they need to do and why they need to do it. A coach. Now, often they say that people like to get a personal coach when they go to gym, because if they try to do that on their own, they would never have the discipline to be able to do that. They need somebody to tell them what to do. The difference between a coach where you've chosen to go to a gym and a parent is that you know what the coach is doing is good for you, but sometimes as a parent, the children at that stage don't know what you're doing is good for them. But inevitably, you are still their coach. And after that, you become their consultant. And so hopefully, they've taken on board your principles, and then they get to a point and they say, I actually value mom and dad's opinion. I want to go to them and ask them about this and about that. And I'll be very privileged to see these different roles play out in our children's lives. They haven't always come to us. Sometimes they've gone on their own and they've made some bad mistakes. But ultimately, they've often come to us, Dad, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you think about this relationship? What do you think about that? How do I handle this particular situation or struggle that I have? And so these are the different stages we have. But often what happens is we have this completely the wrong way around as a parent. So that's why you see in the supermarket a parent trying to negotiate with their child why they cannot have that fizzer. You know? If you read on the label, my lovey, it's got this many calories and it's got so much sugar. And if you have to eat it now, you get on a sugar high and you know what it's like when you have a sugar high and you aren't allowed it. It's just like, no. And then sometimes you get so distraught because they're making a scene that you just give in anyway and you give it to them. And they know it, they're playing you, they know exactly. We'll look at discipline just now, but there's a lovely example, and I'll share it now, of a friend of mine who had a very, very strong willed daughter. And she was making one big performance in the supermarket. And instead of giving in to her and making a scene, he actually parked the trolley, drove home. He was at Cascades, drove home to hike, did what he had to do, we'll get to discipline just now, drove all the way back and carried on to the shopping. And he said it was a turning point for the discipline of his child and the relationship with his child. Because he didn't want to get into this whole negotiation thing anymore. He needed to lay down the law. That was the rule. And if you break the rule, there are consequences. And we'll look at that just now. But we have so many parents bartering and trying to reason with a 3-year-old. And then when they get to 13, 14, or even 15, and they're wanting to go to a party, and they say, Dad, please can I go to the party? And you say, no. You haven't even thought about it, just no. But they say, Dad, but no. The answer is no. And so at that stage, you need to start engaging with them, and hopefully they'll get to the same conclusion as you are. So like, okay, who else is going to this party? So and so and so and so and so and so. Remember what happened last time when they went to that party? This went down. Are you wanting to get involved in that? No, Dad. Well then, do you really think you should be going? But I really want to go. And then you kind of reason with them. Ultimately, you've got the final say. But you're starting to become more of a coach because you're helping them understand the reasons why you are doing it. And so we often flip this on its head. We try and reason with a 3-year-old and we lay down the law with a 13-year-old, and it should be the other way around. And so we can often catch ourselves out when we do that. And it's so important to realize that there are stages. So there are these 2 key principles. There's a principle of readiness. So only teach children what they are mentally and emotionally capable of learning. So we don't want to teach them anything complex, even whether it's about the Lord, when they are young. We just keep it simple. And we teach it to them when they are ready. The other side of that, though, is that when they are ready, that we are teaching them. So we are engaging them. We are engaging them about relationships when they're young because we want to hear it from us. We don't want them to hear it from kids on the playground. Or even worse, potentially from the LO teacher at school. Okay? They need to hear it from us. And so we need to be ready, and we need to know at what stage they need to be ready for us to be able to input into their lives and share various components. Now, unfortunately, due to the world and where it is at the moment, we often feel that we need to actually engage with our children about topics and have conversations which we feel they're not quite ready yet, but we'd rather hear it from us than hear it from somebody else. But we need to be aware of that. The principle of responsibility as well. Never habitually do for your children what they can do for themselves. How often do you see that playing out? I've seen like 6-year-old children sitting in their chair going, "Mommy, please feed me." You know? And so there comes the aeroplane and like, come on. You know, they can feed themselves. So they will play into that. And so as well, when they get older, you know, dad's tired from work, mom's tired from work, mom's trying to make supper, and dad's trying to finish up some work, whatever, and mom's juggling homework at the same time. There's one kid on their phone saying, "Mom, when's supper ready?" You know? They've got responsibilities, and we need to set those responsibilities. We make a rod for our own back if we don't give kids responsibilities when they're capable of doing them. I mean, it starts from when they tie their own shoelaces to when they start making you a meal at home. And that can happen a lot sooner than we think. Okay, the big one.
Just on that responsibility,
Sure.
just a very important concept is not to give kids responsibility that they can't handle.
Absolutely.
Like a young child looking after
Another
young
child.
child,
Absolutely.
something happens to them because they'll never recover.
Absolutely. No, very true. Yeah, so both of those actually follow a very careful timeline. It's different for each child. I mean, sometimes some children are quite responsible when they're younger and some need a bit more mature. Often it's different between a guy and a girl. Guys often take a little bit longer to be a bit more mature. But a very valid point. Okay, so this whole thing of boundaries, which kind of speaks to discipline. And so just to dispel the myth that discipline is punishment, we're going to look at the differentiation between the two. So punishment is retribution. Retribution basically means you've done this, you will pay, you have inconvenienced me, these are the consequences. And effectively it's the same as sending somebody off to prison. Because there's a consequence for your action. Discipline is teaching obedience to God through consequences and actions in an atmosphere of love. And so often, the practical meting out of discipline can potentially take on a form which is punishment, but the way in which you do it and your heart in it is completely different between punishment and discipline. So, discipline basically is short-term pain for a long-term gain. We take the scenario again in that supermarket, okay? It was short-term pain for this friend of mine to drive off back to Hawick, discipline his kid, and go back to continue shopping. But that was for a long-term gain. But because of inconvenience, and that obviously took time, we often settle for this short-term peace for long-term pain. And so we continue to try and keep the peace, so we'll slip them the sucker at the supermarket aisle. I mean, supermarket marketers are clever. They know where to put the stuff. It's at eye level, the little kids. Yeah, that problem. So, and the trickiest thing about this is sometimes we just don't have the energy, don't we? I don't want to deal with this again. So you just give in. But if you think about what you're trading, you have a very short time of peace, but that pain is going to continue for a long time. And so the short-term pain for long-term gain, we need to have that in the back of our minds all the time. He who withholds the rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. That's from Proverbs 13, verse 24. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far away. Proverbs 22, verse 15. Couple that with this. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, Because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son in which he delights. How precious is that? So we talk about the rod, and obviously the world has completely dispelled this, that it's abuse. But actually, if you don't, you're actually telling your child that you do not love them. That's hectic.
Yeah.
But it's serious. And so we need to be so careful that we don't buy into this whole thing that the world is saying, that we cannot discipline our children. Now, we need to take the Bible at face value. And so a rod is a rod. Okay? There's no two ways about it. I've got mine here.
Yeah.
You recognize this, He's got a sad face because none of us like doing it. Mr. Smacky, here we go, Mr. Smacky. He's now used to stir the quaking pots. That's why he's looking a bit brown. But he did it to come out on occasions. Okay. And so there are some practical steps to discipline. Because sometimes we leave it till when we're completely frazzled, and then discipline does become punishment and irrational. And so we need to be very careful as to how we establish discipline. And discipline is not established when your child is throwing a tantrum. It's established way before. It's potentially even established before that child is even born. Because this is something that you should be discussing with your spouse, or even potential spouse. Because you might have a situation where you believe that discipline should be done completely differently. You might have a situation where one spouse believes that you need physical discipline with the rod, others say no, that's out. And so we need to deal with this even potentially before we get married. And that's why it's lovely to see young people here, because these are the things you need to ask your potential spouse the question before you even enter into marriage, because this is coming down the road. Okay. So, first of all, you need to establish responsibility and boundaries. The kids need to know where those boundaries are. There's a lovely little experiment which was done, and it's quite well known, where they took a whole lot of preschool kids and they put them in a field. And the first field they put them into didn't have any borders or boundaries. There was no fence. And they kind of huddled in together and looked all confused and didn't really explore. They kind of stayed in the middle. They put them in the same field with a fence around it, same size field. Those kids got up and they explored and they played with that entire area because they knew where the boundaries were. And the boundaries didn't restrict them, but they made them secure.
Yeah.
And so boundaries are not something to restrict your child from having fun. They just ensure that they are secure so they can explore the boundaries. But they also know that there are consequences when they step over those boundaries. And it's important because if that boundary wasn't there, they could step over that boundary and actually get knocked over. And so it's important that those boundaries are established. You first need to give a clear warning. And so they need to know that if they step over that line, there are consequences. But if you have never told them not to step over that line, and then you completely overreact when they do, that's a problem, because you haven't given them a clear warning. That is completely unfair. You need to give them a clear warning. Use contracts, especially for older kids. So if you want to establish the boundaries, and when they're young, obviously you just lay them down and that's it. That is the boundary. You don't go over that. There are consequences if you go over that. But when they're older, get them to establish their own boundaries. So if, for example, you have a child who's renowned for not doing their homework, and every time there's an argument because they head off to school not having completed their homework, then you ask them, okay, well, we need to get this sorted out because obviously we need to get you a good education, homework is part of that, so how are we going to work this one? So they come up with their own, what's the word I'm looking for? Their own consequences, there we go. Their own consequences for not having done their homework. And they'll often give harsher consequences that you would have actually thought up in the first place. And then when they get to that point, and they say, "Oh, Dad, you said that I can't go to this basketball game because I'm like now I'm the main oak and I'm playing on the team, and this is the pinnacle of the competition, and now you're saying I'm not allowed to play," and you pull up the contract and said, "I didn't say you couldn't play. You haven't done your homework, and you said if I haven't done my homework, I wouldn't be able to play the next basketball game." And so you don't need to even raise your voice, you just pull out the piece of paper. But it does take prep work beforehand before you can get to that point. And so using contracts for older kids is a great way to establish those boundaries, and effectively you're giving them a clear warning. Don't ask why, establish what. So, you can't, a little kid goes up and grabs the chip packet off the shelf, and you get to him and you say, "Why did you do that?" It's like, "Well, I had a craving, and you haven't fed me breakfast, and it looked really nice. The marketing company did a good job with the label." Well, you can't ask them why. They just grabbed it. It's not a question of why. You just establish, what did you do? Well, I took the packet. What was the rule? When I walk down this aisle, I don't touch anything in this aisle. And so you don't ask them why they did it. I mean, we're all sinners. We do the wrong things, okay? They can't go into this whole legal, or this whole explanation of, I was born a sinner, and that temptation, I couldn't resist that temptation, and so I just grabbed. No. What did you do? Is it the wrong thing? Was it something that we specifically said that you couldn't do? Yes. Well, then there are the consequences. So don't ask why, establish what, and get them to explain the what. Then you need to have consequences, and they need to know what those consequences are. And so, if they cross that line, they need to know they're not going to get a hiding out of nowhere. They need to know that if they cross that line, that particular line that you cross is going to be a hiding. And so we need to be very careful when we bring this out, because often we can bring this out in frustration. And so we need to make sure we're very clear, even with us as husband and wife and mom and dad, what constitutes a hiding. And effectively, it should always be willful disobedience. If they are willfully disobedient, and that basically means they've known the clear warnings, those boundaries have been put in place, and they knowingly have crossed the line. That is willful disobedience. That constitutes discipline. It has to. However, if it's just something which has completely got you and frustrated you, that is not a reason to give somebody a hiding. I've seen it before where a child, by accident, has knocked over something really precious and broken it. And it's worth a lot of money. And that gets the hiding. And he didn't really mean to do it. However, they can stand there in defiance, and you tell them to go and do something, and they stand there and go, "No!" Which deserves the hiding? No. Okay? Because this is the character we're trying to build. We're trying to build godly character, and that is defiance. That is about self. We're trying to get them to build this godly character, which is not about self, but about the Lord and about others. And so we have to be so careful when we bring this out. And often they say that if you're caught up in heat of the moment and something has gone down which you're really frustrated with, you send your child to the room, you go to your room, because you need a cool off too. Because you need to do this in a controlled environment. Okay. Communicate briefly. So, when you give a hiding, don't have a big smile on your face. Okay, because this whole And like, one of the worst things you can tell your kids, this is going to hurt me, but it's going to hurt more than it's going to hurt
It's a lie.
you. But effectively, I mean, with art,
Now you must just tell them this is going to hurt you a lot more than it's going to hurt.
but I found it quite difficult to smack my kids, I must admit. It wasn't easy, but I just knew it was the right thing to do. And so the fact that you communicate brief, this is not something that you want to do, but it's something that you have to do. And it's something that you've communicated with them, that even though you don't particularly want to do it, it's something that we have to do. So you encourage sincere repentance. So if you do need to smack a child and you're at that stage, Chip Ingram does this, he says, you need to make sure that you do this properly, it needs to sting. My kids will tell a funny story because when they were sent to the room, they would listen for the footsteps to see if it was mom or dad. And if it was mom, it was like, yes! Because mom, she couldn't really wield this thing properly. But if it was dad, it was like, eesh. So they get the 2 pairs of pants on. But you don't want to inflict a wound on your child. It's a short, sharp flick of the wrist.
Unless they talk about
You don't take a run up from that. I can just imagine Pete doing that. But ultimately, we do it in love. Okay, it's unconditional love. And so once you smack them, the beauty of it is that it's over. It's done. You hug your child, you love your child, you pray with your child asks for forgiveness, and you move on. All these other forms of discipline, like sit in the corner for half an hour, and then they come out after 15 minutes, and then what do you do? And it's like, it's a nightmare. School's having to deal with this now, because they aren't allowed to use this anymore. And even it's coming here now as well. I have to be very careful when you start advocating this, because this could potentially be seriously frowned upon. The sad thing is that stopping corporal punishment doesn't actually stop abuse. Those people who are still abusing children are still abusing children. They're actually now preventing us from lovingly disciplining our children. And so we need to continue with this. Obviously, be very cautious and careful. It's always done in private. You don't do it in public, because obviously it's going to seriously, it's damage your child as well. Besides the fact you could get into serious trouble. You need to do it in private. And so it is a personal and it's a private thing. And the other thing as well, never use this to smack your child. This is used to care, feed, love, caress, hold, hug your child. This is used for discipline, and then it gets put away. Okay, so just a couple of practical things now. One, golden nugget, which I heard when I was in the early throes of parenting, is say yes as many times as you can. Because if you can say yes as many times as you can, then your no means no. And so what I mean by that is that when your child comes to you and say, Dad, please can you come and kick the ball with me? If genuinely you cannot do it at that moment because you have an important engagement, then that's fine, you can say no. But if it's purely because you're feeling tired, it's not exactly what you felt like doing at that time, you wanted to sit down, kick your shoes off and lie on the sofa, don't say no, say yes. And so if you build this environment where you're saying yes as many times as you possibly can, when you say no, your child knows that it's no. And so there's no nagging. Oh, Dad, please can you come kick the ball with me? I know you can. Oh, no, I'm tired. And then they nag and nag and nag. But then when it gets to a point where you definitely can't, they start to nag and nag and nag. And so let your yes be yes and your no be no. And so if you say yes as many times as you can, then it makes it a whole lot easier for your child to accept the no. Sorry, my notes are just falling down here. In preparation for tonight, I actually asked my kids to help me. I asked them to give me 3 childhood memories that they remember. 3 of the first ones that spring to mind. And then I asked them that if they were a parent one day, what would they do the same as what we did with them, and what would they do different? And they actually found it quite difficult to do. And I'm just going to read through it because then it takes the focus of you and kind of puts the focus on me and highlights my shortcomings. But I thought they were very, very interesting, coming from kids that we've tried to raise in a godly home. And so I'll kick up with my oldest. Those of you who don't know us as a family, I've got an oldest son, Callum, who's not here as a varsity, he's 22. And then I've got Rach, who's 19, and Lex, who's 16. Close to 20 and 17. So they're kind of 5 years apart. And so Callum's first memory was, we were down at Cascades and he was doing a bike race, and this was the neglectful parent that I am. He had done the mongoose race, and then the mountain bike champs were there as well. And they do this 4-cross where there's like a hectic kind of BMX track, but for mountain bikes. And we went up there, and Wade Wood was with us as well. And so there was like a serious dip that went down and up the other side. And I said to him, my boy, you mustn't hold the brakes, because if you do, you're not going to get up the other side. And he was quite a cautious child at that point. And so he didn't quite understand me, because I said, don't hold on the brakes. I didn't say don't use your brakes. And so he went off. And he went over the first bump a bit too far. I said, like, boy, you need to hold your brakes now. And he was too far ahead. And he went over the next, the third one, he just took off. He went flying up in the air, all I saw was his legs and arms, and this mighty crash at the bottom. I don't know what I was going to find when I got there. And so I ran to him, and he kind of picked himself up. He said, but Dad, you said I must hold my
Obedient child.
Anyway, but he said the thing that he remembers is that I made him get back on his bike and ride to the medical tent. But the fact that I got him to get back on his bike was very significant to him, which I found very interesting. The things that they love, they always speak about it, and they share this at Cass Mom's Memorial. Anniesburg, we used to go away, and we still do. Every year we go away as a family on holiday. And it just builds memories. And so do things which are traditions. They don't have to cost a whole lot of money. Okay? We're very privileged to be able to go away on this holiday, but that's often, their childhood memories come from that, because they're also annual. Every year we kind of reflect what was it like the previous year and the previous year. And so having something which is a tradition is great. Some of them don't have to cost any money. One thing he put here was, there's a tradition we have on birthdays that everybody in their pajamas come and sits on Mom's bed. We even try and do it these days, which is a bit tricky because there's like 5 adults kind of perch on a double bed. But it's just a tradition that we have, and it's something that they love, and that builds relationships that bond. The big thing in our house was birthday traditions. We used to go big on birthdays, and every one of our kids can remember every single birthday that they have. They remember the cake and they remember the theme. And it was just a tradition that we had. If you're not big on birthdays, it's fine. But it was just something that we did, which they really enjoyed. Rach said one night she remembers her being really scared, and Kath telling her that the angels were looking after her. And the little angel that my mom had made her was at the foot of her bed and said, that's a reminder that the angels are looking after her. And that basically she knows that whenever she goes and asks Kath a question, she's always going to get an honest and straight answer. And those are things that means a lot for her. Also just doing things with them. She remembers I took her out on a date once. She loved that. Even now, going to swim in the sea together, just doing things together, those are the memories. Makes special holidays together, birthday parties, and looking after all my animals. Okay, so those are all good things. Now, what are the things they would do that would be different? Very, very interesting. Callum said, less warnings and more hidings. Interesting. You can say that now, he's not going to get in. It's quite funny, James Dobson, he said, sometimes if you can't do hidings in public, because obviously that's tricky, he says there's a muscle here in your shoulder that if you pinch at the right angle is incredibly painful. And so, you can use that as an alternative form of punishment. Okay, and it does work. But he said there's a rule of thumb. If you can't reach it, don't pinch it. Okay. But that was interesting. So even what we thought we'd established boundaries, but clearly we got into into that rut of warning too many times, and we should have just succeeded together and not hiding. Interesting, he said that. More, I think this was you, mate. More consistent with chores and pocket money. And not giving the youngest the most chores. This was quite sobering, not overreacting on small arguments and just moving on. Sometimes Kath and I can get caught in some small arguments instead of moving on, and obviously that's something we need to work on. Rach said that she would, with her own family, she would pray more together and read the Bible more often, which also was very sobering for us. But on the whole, I won't read through the whole list, but they did give me, which was quite comforting, a lot of things that they would redo, that we did, a lot of things I've already shared. But one of the key things they said, which I haven't mentioned yet, is we love the fact that you are involved in church. Because that just makes it so much easier for us to be involved in church. And so you can't tell your kids that it's good to go to youth and it's good to come to church. When you sit down on a Sunday morning, you say, no, I really don't feel like going. Do you feel like going, guys? No, I don't feel like going. Or at least to stay at home today. And that can just build bad habits. And so if you want your children to follow the Lord one day and to be involved in His work one day, then you need to make sure that whatever God's called you to, that you are doing it. And if that at this point in time just means that you attend meetings regularly and that you support the church whichever way you can, then that's what you need to be as an example to your children. Because it's this whole thing with modeling. You can't do one thing and expect your children to catch something else. And what you apply your hand to and what you spend your time on, they're going to see quite clearly those are the things that you value. And so we need to, if we say that Jesus is our all in all and we sing it all our hearts on a Sunday morning, we need to make sure that we practice what we preach and our actions met out the words that we say or the words that we sing. And so I thought that was very sobering for them to say that. And by doing that, you are doing things together as a family. And that builds relationships that bond. And that builds relationships that last a lifetime.